So we have the Avata set up now, everything is connected. We are testing out the brand new firmware of the Avata, which supposedly should fix some of the yaw washout issues, but it's actually just DJI putting a band-aid on it. What I want to do is to do just a normal flight scenario, capturing some cinematic shots here with the Avata and see if the Avata behaves normally, if it's still safe to do those turns that I normally do when I fly and capture cinematic videos with the Avata. So let's just get it up into the air before it starts to cloud up here and see how it goes. Now I'm also recording this in 30 FPS with the Avata 4K 30, which is also included in the brand new firmware update, and that also means we have 10-bit. So I'm going to give you my opinion on that, whether it's worse or better than flying in 60 FPS, because you know there's two different frame rates, so you might have some different feeds in your goggles as well, and it might be a little bit jittery.
Now, as soon as I pulled the Avata up into the air, the storage of my Action 3 ran out. But what I was doing here was basically to start with a slow flight, flying around in sports mode to get everything warmed up before switching over to manual. And for this sequence right here, I was also flying a little bit more cautious than I normally do, just to see the limit of where this yaw washout might happen when it comes to speed and turns. So the way I'm flying here is a typical beginner scenario when jumping into manual mode for the very first time. Now doing some basic cinematic flying here, trying to capture some shots of the same area but different angles, I didn't notice any change in the behavior compared to the previous firmware. I also did some slightly sharper turns to see if that had any impact on the aircraft, but I didn't notice anything at all, flying in a normal way, capturing some cinematic shots in 4K 30 FPS. Now the following day I headed out to do some further testing, and I went a bit harder on the sticks this time, and I also added more speed and tried my best to drive it into failsafe. On the second attempt, the Avata flipped and the new bandage kicked in and flipped it back into normal mode. So it's not a complete fix. You will still experience your washout if you get to that limit of where it happens, but the bandage that DJI put on the FPV drone, you know, it helps. It's hard to tell exactly where the limit is when it comes to the tipping point of how fast and sharp you need to turn for the Avata to fall into failsafe and prevent a yaw washout. But as for normal flying, shooting some cinematic videos in manual mode, I can't see any issues with this drone. Even though my flights are quite similar to the crash I had when I first got this drone, being aware of the issue really helps. And it helps you fly in a safe way, and for cinematic videos, there's no cinematic in sharp turns. So a few tips here is to take the Avata high up into the air and then do your own testing to see where is the limit of this yaw washout and practice yourself on recovering. Despite DJI having the bandage on the Avata, it's really important to know the limits of when this is happening. At low altitude, the failsafe might not even be enough to save your drone, so if you aim to be an active drone pilot with the Avata, the more you know about this drone, the better flight experience you're gonna have. Another tip here is to get familiar with the turns of the motion controller. The motion controller has its limits for how sharp and fast you can turn, so getting familiar with the motion you see in your goggles will also help you once you get into manual mode. Now let's talk about frame rates. I was so excited about this firmware update because it had 4K 30 FPS, something I've been wanting since day one. But there's also a significant difference going from 50 or 60 FPS down to 30 FPS. So there's something that I've been wanting to try for a very long time, and that is to chase a car with an FPV drone. It looks so amazing and it looks so easy, and yeah, I set out to chase a car, not at maximum speed. It was pretty slow. I didn't feel any motion sickness at all, and I was actually expecting that because we were going on a bumpy road and I was having the goggles on and it was all over the place. So I was actually expecting to feel some motion sickness, but I didn't. The only thing that I had a huge issue with was the image feed in my goggles were extremely jittery. And this was caused from the 30 FPS recording, which also reflects back to your goggles as you both record and get the live feed from the same camera. I also did a comparison test with 30 and 50 FPS where I normally do my testing, and because it's an area which I'm familiar with, I could do a more thorough test. So starting with 30 FPS here and doing some cruising around the area, I did feel that something was off. Even though my previous 6 flights was in 30 FPS, it was easy to tell the difference when flying in a location I'm familiar with and been flying for so many years with 50 and 60 FPS. The image feed seemed to have more stuttering and I wasn't as confident as I normally am. As soon as I flipped it over to 50 FPS, it was a whole different world. The image feed was silky smooth and it was just gliding through the air. So recording in 30 FPS, I'm not quite sure if I like it. I mean, the outcome is amazing. 4K 30 FPS DC in like 10-bit, it's stunning. But I can't really sacrifice the safety when I'm flying, and when you fly in 30 FPS, you're gonna have a worse feed in your goggles than you would have with 50 and 60 FPS. But it seems like I need to get myself a GoPro Hero 11 Mini if I'm gonna fly this with 30 or 24 FPS. But of course, for some scenarios, recording in 30 FPS with the Avata wouldn't be a problem at all. Like these shots which you see right here, where I'm flying a bit slower and not too close to any obstacles. It's the perfect example for shooting in 30 FPS, and you're still gonna have a pretty good and stable feed in your goggles. You're not gonna have much stuttering when you fly slow and when you fly in bright conditions and so on. But as soon as you gain that speed and you fly close to obstacles, you might see some stuttering in your feed. And if you're a brand new FPV pilot and this is the first time that you get into FPV, starting in 30 FPS might not be the way to go. It's not a huge issue between the 30 and 50 FPS, but if you're used to filming in 50 and 60 FPS with your DJI FPV drone or your Avata, and then you suddenly go over to 30 FPS, you're gonna notice a significant difference in the live feed which you see in your goggles. Now, if you're really determined to shoot 30 FPS with your Avata, it's of course something you get used to. And if you can handle the 30 FPS stutter at any speed, just go for it. It looks so amazing. I would definitely prefer to shoot in 30 FPS over 50 and 60 FPS, but there's always a few cons if you record in 50 and 60 FPS and you also record with different cameras. Like I'm recording with this camera right here, the Sony a7S III in 24 FPS right now, and then I have the Avata clips which I showed you, which is 30 FPS, also 50 and 60 FPS. There is a few cons to that. If you throw everything at the same timeline and don't do anything about it, you might experience some stuttering as well because it's different frame rates. So that means if you're gonna have a silky smooth outcome on your video without any stuttering, you need to slightly speed up the clip in post and add something like optical flow to remove the spikes and the stuttering from the 50 FPS clip when it's put on a 24 FPS timeline. So you don't really need to slow it down to 50%. You can also slightly change the speed, but in some cases you might also want to add some optical flow to smoothen out the clip further more. So that's one of the cons with shooting in 50 and 60 FPS. But from all the testing I've done with this drone so far, I mean, it's definitely safe to fly. And if you've been on the fence of getting one, I think you should go for it. The new firmware update definitely helps correcting the drone when it's experienced a yaw washout, but if you also get to know its limits, I'm sure you won't have any issues. And capturing cinematic FPV videos doesn't always mean you have to go full speed and turn on a dime. Now, if you're already updated to the latest firmware, what's your take on 4K 30 FPS and the 10-bit D Cinelike? Let me know down in the comment section below. And also, if you have experienced any differences with the Avata after updating to the latest firmware. And if you have any questions related to the Avata, let me know down in the comment section below. And also, if you haven't subscribed already, make sure to do that. And also hit the notification bell. And if you enjoyed this video, give it a like for the algorithm. That would be really appreciated. So until next time, take care, fly safe, and I will see you in the next video.